Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is part 11 on the Theodore Robert Bundy series, and this is on his escapes. And we'll start off with the copyright disclaimer and the disclaimer that these are true crime videos. They're not made for children and they may contain sensitive subject matter, so viewer discretion is advised. It's July 29th, 1976, and Ted goes to the Utah jail. He's beginning to serve a sentence of 1 to 15 years for the kidnapping of Carol DeRange. By August 2nd, he was assigned to the print shop. And of course, Ted starts using the print shop to plan an escape. By October 18th, in the print shop, Ted had placed an escape kit in a garbage can, and he was observed by the guard. And when they retrieved the kit had an airline schedule for Salt Lake City, a shaving kit in it, bandages, candy bars, peanuts, chapstick, sun lotion, and a sketch of a driver's license and a Utah road map. In the shakedown, he also had a social security card belonging to another person, and the guards were overly watchful of him while he was in the jail at this time because he had a reason to run, and he began performing overt acts. On October 21st, the Deputy District Attorney Ashley Anderson presented to District Judge George Lohr an affidavit and a request for an arrest for Ted. Judge Lohr signed the warrant, and they were in the process of attempting to extradite Ted from the state of Utah to Colorado for the purpose of prosecuting him for the first-degree murder in connection with the death of Karen Campbell. On October 22nd, the state of Colorado began the extradition proceedings. They obtained a warrant for his arrest for the first-degree murder of Karen Campbell. And like we mentioned in previous videos, hair matched Karen Campbell's that was retrieved from Ted's car. Also, Melissa Smith's and Carol DeRange. Their hairs or limb hairs were matched. So Ted immediately began planning a renewed escape. There was a lot going on for Ted at this time. On October 26, 1976, he was on trial for the misdemeanor charge of failure to stop for a police officer. So this is regards to the arrest for the burglary tools and where he had evaded the police officer, Hayward, and Bundy and Hayward were both called as witnesses, and Bruce Lubeck represented Ted for this charge. Hayward testified that Bundy went through 2 stop signs to try to evade arrest. Ted also pled guilty to having someone else's social security card when he had been frisked or patted down, and back at the jail he was transferred to a maximum security unit. The next day, Ted made a statement about the Karen Campbell charges, and he said, "I'm absolutely certain that should I be allowed a fair trial in Colorado, I'll be found not guilty of the charge." He said, "Through personal knowledge, I can say I have never killed, never kidnapped, and never even desired to injure another human being." By November 25th, Ted was officially charged with the first-degree murder of Karen Campbell, and he began fighting the extradition to Colorado as a stall tactic to gain time. He really wanted to go there, but he wanted to stall. So he began cataloging his kills to one of his attorneys. Now, mind you, the attorney-client privilege is in full effect. But later, that attorney is given leave to talk about the truth, after his death. And so here we go. Under the attorney-client privilege, Ted admitted to the following, according to one of his attorneys. He admitted to, between 1972 and 1973, killing 8 women in California. He admitted on January 31st, 1974, killing a young woman hitchhiker, who we don't know. He admitted to Linda Ann Healy, Donna Manson, Susan Rancourt. He admitted through the dates. I don't think by name, but by the dates. Roberta Parks, Brenda Ball, Georgianne Hawkins, Janice Ott, and Denise Naslund. And then, about a month later, in Vancouver, Washington, another person. So a total of 18 victims he had confessed to his attorney at this time. So he tells his attorney he's afraid Utah is going to find more bodies. So he thought the death penalty would go through quicker in Utah, and that's why he wanted to strategize a transfer to Colorado. But he wanted to stall it. Honestly, don't try to make too much sense out of this. Ted said he wanted to then present a psychiatric defense. His attorney tried to bow out as his counsel. I don't blame him. But Ted wrote him a pleading letter begging for his life, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope, that kind of thing. But Colorado wanted Ted expedited for Karen Campbell, and there was evidence of eyewitness identification of him being at the inn, which would later fall apart, and he had his credit card activity around there, and so Ted was extradited there in January of 1977. Here's some footage from Ted from around this time.
My class is graduating in about a month. Now that does this.
Why did you decide to defend yourself?
I thought it was right. I wanted to get involved. I wanted to become a part of my defense because I am such a part of it. I mean, obviously, I'm going to bear the consequences, so why not bear the responsibility?
Do you get fresh air, sun? Do you get out?
Well, I get to go to the library. It's a 50-yard walk from here across the parking lot to the library, and that's my fresh air.
For somebody who believes he is so innocent, why was there no emotion?
People say Ted Bundy didn't show any emotion. There must be something in that. I showed emotion. You know what people said? See, you really can get violent and angry. There's no right way for me to act. But I've kept it together because there's no point in destroying myself. I have got to keep myself together. I have got to stay calm. I've got to keep my presence of mind, because as long as I do that, I'm going to beat these people. And that's the way I feel.
Ted also had chats with Bob Broudis, the Pitkin County Sheriff Deputy, on the travels while he is being escorted to court. And Bob once recalled how Ted asked him to get a Harry Houdini biography from the library and a topological map of the area. And Broudis said, no way. So Ted later said he didn't get along with some of the Pitkin County Sheriff's officers. He'd been transferred to the Glenwood Springs, and so he was transported to the courthouse about 50 miles. It gave him time to chat with the different deputies on his long drives. It's creepy looking back at this interview footage. Here he's referencing Salt Lake City, and just listen to it.
I'll tell you, as long as they attempt to keep their heads in the sand about me, there's going to be people turning up in canyons, and there are going to be people being shot in Salt Lake City because the police there aren't willing to accept what I think they know, and they know that I didn't do these things. And the man who kidnapped Carol Duranch is going to continue to be free, and not only her, but every other young woman in the Salt Lake Valley is going to be threatened by that person or persons. And it's happening today, and it's going to happen in the future.
And now note what he's saying here about escape.
I swear to God, every man in that prison at one time or another thinks about going, wishes he wasn't there, and wishes he could fly over those fences. I've dreamed about flying over those fences. I've dreamed about climbing over those fences and tunneling under those fences. With every other man in there, I've dreamed about being free.
Are you angry?
Sure, I get angry. Very, very angry and indignant. I don't like being locked up for something I didn't do, and I don't like my liberty taken away, and I don't like being treated like an animal, and I don't like people walking around and ogling me like I'm some sort of weirdo, because I'm not. I've matured in the past year. Believe me, I've grown in the past year, and I've learned a lot of things about myself in the past year. My only misgivings is that I might never be in a position to apply it, on the streets where I'd like to apply it.
I mean, is this wishful thinking, or is he signaling, hey, I want out of jail. I want out of jail. In the next segment, he's asked directly if he's ever physically harmed anyone, and he says no, and then he looks right at the camera and says no, and it's almost like he's saying, when he looks, it's like, are you buying this? Like, whenever people lie, they say something and then they look. Did that person buy it?
Have you ever physically harmed anyone?
Ever physically harmed anyone? No. No. You know, again, not in the context I think that you're speaking of.
You are not guilty.
I'm not guilty. Does that include the time I stole a comic book when I was 5 years old? I am not guilty of the charges which have been filed against me.
And the allegations.
And the allegations.
The rumors and the
I don't know all of what you're speaking about, Lucky. It's too broad and I can't get into it in any detail. But I'm satisfied with my blanket statement that I'm innocent. No man is truly innocent. I mean, we all have transgressed in some way in our lives. And as I say, I've been impolite, and there are things I regret having done in my life. But nothing like the things I think that you're referring to. I've been told that the parents of these girls are fairly decent people. I don't know. And I really feel for them because apparently they've suffered an incredible tragedy in their lives. The loss of a loved one is probably the most extreme kind of loss you can suffer in this life. And I feel as much for them as anybody can.
You think about getting out of here?
Well, legally, sure.
A few weeks after this interview, Ted Bundy escaped.
So let's set the stage here. June 1977, Ted and Liz have drifted apart. Ted began schmoozing Carol Boone when he finds out that Liz was dating someone else. Ted also will later say how while he was locked up, he felt like he'd freed himself of this entity, that it was causing him all these difficulties. This is what he talks about later. But honestly, it was really just a lack of opportunity. He didn't have the opportunity while he was locked up to do those horrible things he was doing. So his new girlfriend, Carol Boone, quickly becomes fanatical about her Bunny. That was her nickname for him, Bunny. And she truly believed in his innocence. It was June 7th of 1977 at the Pitkin County Courthouse in Glenwood Springs, Colorado. And Chuck Leidner was Ted's attorney in this matter. This is preliminary stuff. I will later recall that Ted was a strange individual with eyes like a shark. Turns out that Ted was using maps from Discovery, aerial maps, in order to plan his escape. And security just got lax with him at the old courthouse. On warm days, the second-story windows were left open, and back in his cell, Ted had been practicing by jumping off his top bunk, and he was psyching himself up daily to make the jump when he got the chance. And when Ted dressed for court that day, he was wearing many layers of clothing. During mid-morning recess, he simply walked back to the law library. There was a row of bookcases at the back of the old courthouse, and when the coast was clear, he simply just jumped out the window. The courthouse had 15-foot ceilings, and he jumped from the second floor, so unsurprisingly, he injured his ankle. He was now on the main street, and he stripped down to his shorts, his long john top, he donned a bandana, and he just walked away. Allegedly, the escape was not noticed for a few minutes, up to 10 minutes. And when everybody returned to court after the break, it was asked, where is he? And he was discovered to be missing, and then someone reported that they saw someone jump out of a window. Is that normal? No, it is not. When Bundy's own attorney was informed of his escape, he said something paraphrased to the effect that he'd never had a client with less confidence in his ability. That he'd feel like he'd have to jump out a window, that his defense attorney wasn't good enough or didn't have a strong enough case. Here's the wanted poster that was circulated after he jumped. Teams of law enforcement searched the hillsides, circulated posters, set up roadblocks, and utilized tracking dogs. Bundy tried to make his way to Crested Butte, but his sense of direction was poor, and Ted found an unoccupied log cabin, and he pried off the heavy wire screen. And the cabin was owned by a man named Fritz Kaiser. And Ted stole a rifle from the cabin, and when he eventually left the cabin, he penned a note, quote, Tom, sorry I broke the window while I was putting in the plywood. Amos, end quote. Ted ended up going the opposite way from Crested Butte, and after wandering around and starving, he made his way back to the cabin. But the caretaker had discovered the break-in, and right at that time, a helicopter with tracking dogs was literally descending over the cabin, which freaked Ted completely out. He was lost, he was unprepared for the wilderness, and he had lost a lot of weight.
There was a big break today in the search for Theodore Robert Bundy. Colorado authorities found a cabin which had been broken into, and the FBI confirmed that fingerprints found inside match Bundy's. Here's Barbara Grossman with more details.
Bundy was being held in Colorado for the first-degree murder of Karen Campbell. She was found dead a few miles out of Aspen in 1975. But last Tuesday, during a pretrial hearing, officers left Bundy alone during a recess, and he jumped out of a two-story window to his freedom. There were no leads until today. Mike Fisher of the Pitkin County District Attorney's Office says authorities found a cabin which had been broken into. Food was gone. So was a rifle. The FBI ran tests on a footprint and fingerprints. Late today, it was confirmed they were Bundy's. The cabin is located about 8 miles southwest of Aspen. Tonight, Fisher reports there was another break-in, this time a car. Clothes were taken, but Fisher says we're not sure if it was Bundy. Dogs have been brought into the area. The search will continue throughout the night. Says Fisher, I think we're very close.
Ted walked back down to Aspen. He stole a Cadillac, and with its dimmed headlights, he was weaving, and his bad driving got him pulled over. Keep in mind that his bad driving will be responsible for almost all of his arrests. Bundy had been on the lam for 6 days. He was on little sleep, and he was limping, but he was taken back into custody. Now he had federal fugitive charges to add to his other list of growing charges. It's June 14th, dead tired Bundy's. He's back in the courtroom, and he's extremely fatigued. He's, quote, unable to think anymore. And the sheriff's department sergeant was quoted as saying, I believe Ted derived a certain amount of satisfaction from the fact he pulled it off as far as he did. Then by the 17th, Bundy was formally charged with 4 new felonies. 2 counts each of felonious escape, 1 count each of burglary and auto theft, and also a misdemeanor count of theft. So 5 charges in total, 4 felonies. Attorney John Henry Brown flew in to see Ted once he was captured. And just as a footnote, John Brown's girlfriend had been murdered in California, and Ted knew about it before he even contacted John Henry Brown for representation. So it's kind of creepy that his girlfriend had fit the profile of a Ted Bundy victim, but John Brown allegedly thought Ted wasn't responsible for that murder. But anyway, he thought Ted was a caricature of a preppy. John Henry Brown has a book called The Devil's Defender, so check it out if you haven't. Ted asked John which states routinely carry out the death penalty, and John said Florida and Texas. Of course, Ted must have had a death wish, right, when he ends up fleeing to Florida? Do you think so? I personally don't think so. I think he was just running, and his mania had damped down, but we're not going to get into that yet. By June 13th, 1977, the authorities looking into the murder of Karen Campbell had the pry bar sent to the Colorado Bureau of Investigations, and it came back positive for the presence of blood. However, the sample was of insufficient quantity for more testing. But just to let you know, they were ramping up the cases against Ted. They were doing more investigation. They were getting more evidence wrapped up, and no doubt Ted was stressing out more about this. On June 24th, 1977, Bundy got into a scuffle before court. The Pitkin County Sheriff's officer said he ripped both of the shoulders of his jail jumpsuit in a scuffle with another inmate before coming into the courtroom. Judge Lohr still needed to make a ruling on the death penalty request, and the attorneys were going to be filing their briefs. No doubt this was putting Ted under tremendous stress. By August 1st, Bundy was claiming there was a silver lining in this whole predicament he was in. He had two Colorado attorneys, Stephen Buzzy Ware and Kenneth Dresner, defending him. Ted had complained about Leidner until he got Buzzy Ware. He only had him for 1 month because unfortunately Buzzy got into a motorcycle accident that killed his wife and critically injured himself, so then he wasn't able to continue as Ted's attorney. Ted proceeded to represent himself in the murder case, and the top bunk in his cell was covered with files of legal papers, correspondence, and other documents. He even had a small radio. Bundy was crowing that who would have thought that coming to Colorado he would be in the driver's seat of his own case, get his own investigator and his own hair experts, and all of this under court order. Bundy found out by November 11th that Melissa Smith's father, Louis Smith, would be able to testify as a prosecution witness in the Aspen case. So he was starting to get nervous. And then two pathologists were set to testify at the upcoming trial. Tick-tock. But oddly, guys, the Karen Campbell evidence was lessening when one eyewitness misidentified a police officer as the suspect. But there was still circumstantial evidence of the ski brochure that was in his apartment with the little X found by the Wildwood Inn, the gas slip showing that he was in the vicinity, the two different license plates, the head hair that microscopically was indistinguishable from Karen Campbell and his VW, him having no solid alibi for any of these instances. So Ted starts planning his escape. And November 22nd, same day, the guards were treating him as a high risk. While in custody, Ted's cell was right next to a jailer's live-in apartment, and Ted went on a fitness and exercise regime, losing like 30 pounds or more, and this was completely missed by the authorities. Like, they did not take note of it. The metal grate over an old ceiling light fixture led to a vent he used to escape. It was 1 square foot. Some authorities firmly believed that Ted had help with cash money. This wasn't ever proven, but Ted did say that someone had given him cash. He didn't ever disclose who it was, but he said that whoever had given him the money didn't know that he was going to use it to escape. It could have been for commissary, who the heck knows, but he did have some cash on him. It was December 29th, 1977. We're at cell number 5 at the Garfield County Jail, and the guard let Ted make a call before the guard went off duty. The jailer then retired to his apartment. He showered, he had dinner around 6:45, and he and his wife went to a movie, Smokey and the Bandit, and then they went shopping. Ted placed his articles, bulky law books, in his bunk to make it look like he was sleeping. One arm of the shirt sleeve was stuffed with paper. He used a wastebasket to form shoulders, and he used the legal books to form the arms and the legs. Ted stood on the top bunk on some law books. He squeezed up into the ceiling through a light fixture that was due to be welded, and this would have been the most difficult part. I mean, he'd lost weight to do it, and crawled through the air duct. He broke through the drywall down into the jailer's closet, and Bundy knew the jailer allegedly was at his girlfriend's apartment. So he put on some civilian clothes and he strolled right on out. After they were informed of Ted's escape, the authorities checked the closet. In the jailer's closet, found 2 missing shirts and a muzzle-loading rifle and the Derringer. The guns were hidden back up in the crawl space along with a flashlight. Ted did not take the firearms with him. Ted went looking for a car to steal, and the car he found was a midget, and he escaped in this car during a blizzard. Note again that Ted's bad driving is usually the reason why he was caught, but not this night. He sped the midget into a snowbank, and he ended up having to flag down someone to pull him out of the snowbank. He ended up driving to Vail, then he took a bus to Denver, then he took a plane from Denver to Chicago. I think I have the list of his travels up here from the FBI's timeline. Tuttle later explained that he was manic when he escaped from Glenwood Springs jail. He'll later say that by the time he arrived in Tallahassee, the mania had passed and he was depressed. By January 3rd, 1978, the manhunt for Ted in Colorado ended, so that was 4 days later. They had searched for 4 days. They believed Ted was no longer in the city. In fact, by the time the jailers discovered him, he was 1,000 miles away with about $250 in his pocket. Law enforcement expected the public to notify them of him if cited. DeRanch was notified of his escape. The FBI began to prepare a federal warrant for his unlawful flight to avoid prosecution, and then they began to place him on the most wanted list. Again, this was January 3rd.
Theodore Bundy made the big time today. That's criminally speaking. The escaped kidnapper received the highest recognition from the FBI.
Dan, wherever he may be, Bundy, a former University of Utah law student, is now on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. Back in 1976, Bundy was found guilty of kidnapping a young woman in Murray. He was serving time for that in the Utah prison when he was charged with killing a vacationing skier, Karen Campbell, near Aspen, Colorado. During a court hearing last summer in Aspen, Bundy jumped out a window. Recaptured 6 days later, he went back to jail, but just before his murder trial last month, the clever convict crawled through the ceiling of his cell in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, and escaped again. He's still out. Today, Bundy was named to the FBI's famous 10 Most Wanted list that was started by J. Edgar Hoover.
The top 10 increases the chances in that each one of our special agents, along with the other law enforcement people around the country, kind of like to get the so-called feather in the cap if they can participate in the capture of a top 10. And just like in any, any other business, when you reach the top, it becomes a little more important to you. We look for all of our fugitives, but there is more media interest in top 10 people. There's more interest from police departments.
Jack Egner, who's Salt Lake's new special agent in charge in Salt Lake, says Bundy is now suspected in the sex killings of 36 women all over the western United States. The wanted posters will go up in federal buildings and post offices across the country. Terry, the Bureau has no real leads on Bundy now. He's still free, and they are offering to pay money on any information that could lead to his recapture. Theodore Bundy, native of Tacoma, Washington, former Utah law student, political campaign worker, convicted kidnapper. Now ranks up there with Pretty Boy Floyd and John Dillinger. He's one of the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives. Bundy was found guilty of kidnapping a woman in Murray, Utah. Was in prison for that when charged with murdering a Michigan nurse, Karen Campbell, near Aspen, Colorado, 3 years ago. Before trial, he escaped, was captured, then last month escaped again, and he's still free. These wanted posters will go up in post offices and federal buildings across the nation. The FBI is offering to pay for information on Bundy.
Well, if it was going well, I wouldn't be having this conference right now to put him on the top 10, let's put it that way. So far, we have not had any indication of exactly where he is located.
Putting Bundy on this list of the criminal elite makes him more famous, but not necessarily any easier to catch. It could make a psychological difference, though, and at this point, with almost nothing to go on, the Bureau needs all the help it can get.
Also note that some of the authorities involved at the jail carried guilt that Ted escaped on their watch and then would go on to Florida on a killing spree. So think Chi Omega, Cheryl Thomas, Kim Leach. None of those things would have happened if he'd been kept in jail. Ted will later tell Chapman that he felt that he'd conquered the entity, that he'd used psychology to try and quote-unquote counter-condition himself and desensitize himself. And he said, I made myself the way I was. There was a time way back when I felt deep, deep guilt about even the very thought of harming someone else. And yet, for some reason, I had desired to condition that out of me, end quote. So while he was in jail, he thought he had beat the urges. He thought he'd conquered this entity, but he just simply didn't have the opportunity in jail. So Ted's going to end up in Florida, and that is when he's going to go on his final spree. So if you found these videos informative, if you like them, hit that like button, hit the subscribe bell, and you'll simply be notified next time I upload. And we will be covering the Florida rampage. And without further ado, have an excellent day. Thanks.